Something is coming. Not a rumor, not a theory, a pattern. The same pattern that appeared before 2008, before 1999, before every major economic collapse in modern history. And right now, at this very moment, that pattern is forming again. Most people won't see it. Most people never do. But somewhere in the world tonight, the wealthiest institutions are quietly moving their money. Central banks are whispering behind closed doors, and the clock has already started. 6 months. That's all that may remain before the economy, that everyone knows, becomes something no one recognizes. The question is not whether this is coming. The question is, are you already too late? Welcome to dominance. Aura, the channel where the world's most important stories are told, not with panic, but with precision. Now, before we go any further, if you haven't subscribed yet, think of it this way. You wouldn't leave the house on a rainy day without an umbrella, would you? Subscribing to this channel is exactly that umbrella. Press that button, slowly, carefully, just like you do anything important in life. It takes 1 second, and it might be the smartest click you make today. And tell us, where in the world are you watching this from right now? Drop your city, your country, right there in the comments. It always surprises us just how far this community reaches. Now let's begin. The grocery store is full, the mall parking lot is busy, the stock market numbers look acceptable. To the ordinary eye, everything appears fine. And that analysts would later say was precisely the problem. Throughout modern economic history, the most dangerous moments have never announced themselves loudly. They arrived quietly dressed in ordinary numbers, wearing the face of stability. The years before 2008 felt normal too. People were buying homes, spending freely, trusting the system. And then, almost overnight, the system revealed what it had been hiding all along. Today, something remarkably similar is unfolding. Consumer spending data shows people are still shopping, but a deeper examination reveals how they are shopping has changed dramatically. Credit card usage across the United States has reached levels not seen since the period just before the 2008 financial crisis. People are not spending because they feel wealthy. They are spending because they feel pressured by inflation, by rising costs, by the quiet desperation of maintaining a lifestyle that their income can no longer honestly support. Meanwhile, the employment numbers that governments proudly announce each month tell only half the story. Behind the headline figures lies a more complex reality. A growing percentage of new jobs belong to the part-time and gig economy sectors. Full-time benefits carrying pension-supported employment is quietly shrinking. Workers are not unemployed, they are underemployed. And that distinction, economists note, makes all the difference when an economic shift arrives. The housing market presents yet another layer of contradiction. In many major cities, property prices remain stubbornly high, giving homeowners a false sense of wealth. Yet mortgage delinquency rates have begun a slow but unmistakable climb. The gap between what homes are valued at and what buyers can actually afford is widening by the month. These signals taken individually might seem manageable. Taken together, they form a picture that seasoned economists recognize immediately. It is the picture of an economy running on borrowed time. In 1999, the same calm existed right before the dot-com collapse erased trillions in wealth. In 2006, the same surface-level confidence was present right before the housing bubble shattered the lives of millions. History, it appears, does not repeat itself exactly. But, as they say, it rhymes with remarkable precision. And today, in the stillness of what appears to be economic normalcy, that familiar rhyme is beginning to form once again. The calm is real, but so is what is building beneath it. There is a room most people will never enter. No cameras allowed. No public minutes published. No press conference afterward. It is the kind of room where the real decisions are made, where central bank governors sit across from finance ministers, where quiet agreements are reached that will eventually touch every grocery bill, every mortgage payment, every retirement account on the planet. And right now those rooms are very busy. What is being discussed inside them reveals something that surface-level economic reporting has almost entirely missed. 3 powerful forces, each significant on its own, are converging simultaneously, and the collision point sits approximately 6 months away. The first force, the debt cycle. Breaking point. For over a decade, governments across the world operated on a simple, seductive strategy: borrow now, worry later. The United States' national debt has surpassed $34 trillion. Japan's debt-to-GDP ratio exceeds 260 European economies, are carrying sovereign debt loads that would have been considered catastrophic by previous generations of economists. For years, low interest rates made this borrowing feel painless. But interest rates are no longer low. Every percentage point increase in rates translates directly into hundreds of billions in additional debt servicing costs, money that governments must now divert away from public services, infrastructure, and economic stimulus. The borrowing strategy that sustained the last decade is now actively consuming the resources needed to manage the next one. The debt cycle, analysts observe, is not slowly bending. It is approaching a breaking point. The second force central banks quietly changing direction. Something unusual has been happening inside the world's most powerful financial institutions. The Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of Japan have all begun subtle but unmistakable policy, repositioning a careful, deliberate unwinding of the monetary frameworks that defined the post-2008 recovery era. This is not being announced dramatically. It rarely is. Instead, it appears in the language of policy documents and carefully chosen words in what is not said during press conferences, as much as what is veteran monetary policy. Analysts describe it as watching a ship change course by 2 degrees. From the deck, nothing appears different, but over distance, the destination changes entirely. The third force, technology. Displacing the economic middle, artificial intelligence is no longer a future concern. It is a present reality, and its economic footprint is expanding faster than labor markets can adapt. McKinsey Global Institute estimates suggest that by 2030, up to 375 million workers worldwide may need to transition to entirely new occupational categories. But transitions of that scale require time investment and institutional support, none of which are currently arriving fast enough. The middle layer of the economy, administrative roles, mid-level finance, customer service, infrastructure, logistics coordination is being systematically hollowed out. Not through dramatic mass layoffs that trigger headlines, but through quiet non-replacement. When someone leaves a mid-level position today in thousands of companies across the world, that position is simply not being filled again. The chair is removed, the work continues done now by an algorithm, and nobody holds a press conference about it. 3 forces. 3 simultaneous pressures, each one significant enough alone to reshape an economy. Together, they do not simply add up, they multiply. And the multiplication, economists who study historical convergence patterns warn, produces outcomes that are rarely gradual and almost never gentle. The architecture of the coming change is already built, the walls are up, the foundation is set. What remains now is simply the moment. It becomes visible to everyone else. Nobody announces when the rules change. There is no press release, no public memo, no government official standing at a podium saying, "Starting today, the game is different." It never happens that way. Instead, the rules change quietly. In the background, while most people are busy living their lives, paying bills, raising children, trusting the system, and by the time the majority realizes the rules have shifted, the people who knew in advance are already 3 moves ahead. This is not conspiracy. This is not theory. This is simply economic history. And economic history has one pattern it never abandons. Every time the architecture of money is redesigned, wealth does not disappear, it moves, the ones already repositioning. Right now, in ways that rarely make front-page news, the largest concentrations of private capital on Earth are quietly changing their positions. BlackRock, the world's largest asset management firm overseeing approximately $10 trillion in assets, has been systematically increasing its exposure to hard assets, real estate infrastructure, commodity-linked investments, physical resource holdings across multiple continents. Private equity firms are doing something equally revealing. They are withdrawing from sectors heavily dependent on consumer spending and middle-class purchasing power and entering sectors that perform, regardless of whether ordinary people are financially comfortable or not. Energy infrastructure, water rights, agricultural land. These are not random portfolio decisions. These are directional signals made by institutions with access to economic modeling, policy intelligence, and historical pattern recognition that simply does not exist in the public domain. They are not predicting the future. They are reading it. And what they are reading is telling them, move now, move quietly, and move toward things that hold value when currencies become unreliable. The case studies, history, already wrote. 3 countries have already lived through versions of what economic analysts now see approaching on a larger, more global scale. Argentina, a nation that experienced full currency collapse not once, but multiple times within living memory. Each time the pattern was identical, the wealthy converted peso holdings into dollars, real estate and foreign assets before the devaluation hit. The middle class, trusting in savings accounts and government assurances, held on until the banks froze their deposits entirely. Overnight, decades of careful saving became functionally inaccessible. The people who lost the most were not the poorest. The poorest had nothing to lose. The people who lost the most were the ones who trusted the system the longest. Turkey provides a more recent case study. Between 2021 and 2023, the Turkish lira lost approximately 80 of its value. Inflation peaked above 85. Ordinary Turkish citizens watched their purchasing power collapse in real time, while simultaneously observing that certain segments of society appeared almost untouched by the crisis. Those who held assets denominated in foreign currencies, those who owned physical property, those who had quietly diversified before the collapse, they did not merely survive. Some of them prospered. Post-2008, America tells perhaps the most instructive story of all. In the years immediately following the financial crisis, while millions of ordinary Americans were losing their homes to foreclosure, a different class of buyer was entering the market with extraordinary aggression. Private equity firms and institutional investors purchased foreclosed properties at scale, entire neighborhoods, in some cases converting them into rental portfolios worth billions. The crisis that devastated one class of Americans built the real estate empires of another, the invisible losers. The group facing the greatest exposure in the coming shift is not the one most people would expect. It is not the very poor social safety structures, however imperfect, provide a floor. It is not the very wealthy they are already repositioning. It is the middle income class, the nurses, the teachers, the small business owners, the mid-level managers, the people who did everything they were told to do, who saved responsibly, who bought homes, who trusted pension systems and retirement accounts built on assumptions that the coming shift may render outdated. They are not being warned. They are not being repositioned. They are being kept comfortable, just comfortable enough to not ask the questions that matter most. The winners already know what is coming. The invisible losers are still waiting for someone to tell them the rules have changed, that someone may never come. Every hourglass has a moment when the sand shifts, not at the beginning, not dramatically at the end, but somewhere in the middle when enough grains have fallen that the ones remaining begin moving faster. That moment is now. The 6-month window is not a date circled on a calendar. It is not a precise prediction from a single economist. It is something far more serious. It is the convergence point identified independently by multiple analytical frameworks across multiple institutional research bodies, across multiple continents. When separate systems of analysis built on different data sets using different methodologies arrive at the same window. That is not coincidence. That is a signal. What Washington already knows. Inside the United States Federal Reserve, a quiet but consequential debate has been unfolding for months. The central question is no longer whether to adjust monetary policy. That decision has effectively been made. The debate now centers on timing and sequencing how to unwind existing frameworks without triggering the very panic that loose policy was designed to prevent. The challenge, as senior economists privately acknowledge, is that there is no clean exit. Every available policy path carries significant consequences. Raising rates further risks collapsing an already strained commercial real estate sector, a sector carrying approximately $1.5 trillion in loans due for refinancing before the end of 2025. Cutting rates prematurely risks reigniting inflation at a moment when public trust in monetary institutions is already dangerously fragile. Washington is not debating whether pain is coming. Washington is debating who absorbs it, what Brussels is quietly preparing for. Across the Atlantic, the European Union faces its own version of the same impossible calculation, only with additional political complexity layered on top. Several EU member states are carrying debt levels that become genuinely unsustainable if borrowing costs remain elevated for another 12 to 18 months. The European Central Bank's room to maneuver is significantly narrower than most public commentary acknowledges. Behind closed doors in Brussels, contingency frameworks are being quietly updated, frameworks that have not been activated since the sovereign debt crisis of 2011 and 2012. The fact that these frameworks are being revisited tells analysts something significant. The institution does not update its emergency playbook unless it believes there is a possibility the emergency becomes real, what Beijing is calculating. China presents perhaps the most strategically complex piece of the global puzzle. Facing its own internal economic pressures, a property sector crisis that has already claimed major developers like Evergrande youth unemployment exceeding 21 at its recent peak, and deflationary pressures that contradict the global inflation narrative. Beijing is simultaneously managing domestic stability while watching Western economic vulnerability. With careful attention, China has been systematically reducing its holdings of United States Treasury bonds, a process that has accelerated quietly over the past 18 months. It has been deepening trade and currency agreements with nations across the global south. Agreements specifically structured to reduce dependence on the US dollar as the world's primary reserve currency. These are not random economic decisions. They are strategic repositioning, made by a government that reads historical economic transitions with the patience and precision of an institution, thinking in decades, not quarterly earnings cycles. The narrow corridor. For ordinary people, not billionaires, not central bankers, not institutional fund managers. The 6-month window represents something both sobering and surprisingly actionable. History consistently shows that the individuals who navigate major economic transitions most successfully are not necessarily the wealthiest or the most sophisticated. They are simply the ones who paid attention early, the ones who reduced exposure to debt-dependent assets before the refinancing crisis arrived, the ones who diversified away from single currency savings before purchasing power eroded, the ones who invested in skills and tangible assets and community resilience before those things became expensive responses to a crisis rather than affordable preparations before one. The window does not demand panic. It demands clarity. What comes after? Every major economic transition in modern history has ultimately produced a new equilibrium, a restructured system that, in time, created new opportunities alongside its considerable damage. 1929 eventually produced the New Deal. 2008 eventually produced a decade of recovery, uneven, imperfect, but real. The transition coming now will produce its own new equilibrium. The question that history consistently and ruthlessly answers is not whether the new equilibrium arrives. It always does. The question is simply, on which side of the transition does a person choose to stand? The sand in the hourglass is moving faster now. The rooms where decisions are made are full. The institutions that understand patterns are already positioned. And somewhere right now, an ordinary person is watching this video making a quiet decision about whether to pay attention or wait a little longer. 6 months. The window is open, but windows do not stay open forever. This was not a story designed to create fear. It was designed to create awareness. Because awareness applied early enough is the only tool that has ever truly protected ordinary people from extraordinary change. If this analysis made you think differently today, share it with someone who needs to see it. Not tomorrow. Today. This has been Dominance Aura, where the patterns others miss become the clarity you carry. Until next time, stay sharp, stay aware, stay dominant.